Maneja.
Hi there, I'm Zach, aka The Manager, an aspiring music producer and a data enthusiast. As a data analyst here in the DC area, I wanted to take the time to provide my professional opinion on some bad data practices that I've seen over the years on social media, from the news, in videos, memes, etc. Also, some exciting news. If you share data with other folks, whether it be your own or somebody else's, congratulations. You're a data analyst, and we are so excited to see what you have to say about the data. So, here's my 3 tips. Tip 1, the source. We often stumble upon a chart, a map, a data table, heck, even words in a social media post that provide us with some sort of information based upon data. As part of this tip, we want to be on the lookout for that source of this data. The dispute of whether or not the source is credible or not is a totally separate topic. Just having a source allows you to go and verify whether or not the information you're being told is actually true. And it even gives you a chance to analyze the data yourself, which I highly recommend. Tip 2, question everything. If you see a visualization or even a social media post presenting data, you should question every single part of what it's telling you. What is this chart showing? Why did they choose those colors in this chart? Why is that part of the graph bigger than that part of the graph? Why'd they select that title? Or, why did they choose that scaling that does not consider the population differences between countries, thus creating an irresponsible level of panic in the general public as it pertains to the coronavirus? Twice. Question every part. Now, this is where a helpful and simple measure comes into play that allows you to figure out just how truthful that data visualization is. And that is called the lie factor. As described in his book, Visual Display of Quantitative Information, Dr. Edward Tufte summarizes that the lie factor measures how truthful the visualization is in depicting the data behind it. By measuring the effect in the visualization and dividing that by the effect of the actual data, that will give you a lie factor. A lie factor, in a perfect world, should be equal to 1, meaning the visualization is not overstating or understating the data behind it. As a rule of thumb, a lie factor should be between 0.95 and 1.05. Anything outside of these should make you seriously question the visualization and even the data behind it. Here's an example from a news outlet that we see quite often in the data community of what not to do with a chart. As the chart describes, it's talking about if George W. Bush's tax cuts expire. To measure the lie factor here, we want to measure what we see first, which would be a difference in tax rates between 2 time periods, January 1st, 2013, and now, or whenever this was published. We visually see that the column labeled now is about 1/4 of an inch tall, while the column labeled January 1st, 2013 is about 1.5 inches tall. The visual difference between these two, or the effect, would be an 83% difference. Now, let's see the difference in the actual data. We see that January 1st, 2013 has a value of 39.6%, and the now has a value of 35%. The data difference between these two, or the effect, would be an 11.6% difference. So, the lie factor here would be 83% divided by 11.6%, which would be 7.2, meaning this visualization is overstating the actual data. Tip 3, digging with context. There should be layers of unbiased analysis and studying that goes into the reading of visualizations and the assessment of the data behind it. A data analyst should squeeze every possible finding out of the visualization in the data unbiasedly. And the data analyst should gather all the findings that they can in an unbiased manner. Too often, an end result is already in mind, and the data is forced to fit into this end result. Consider the full context of the data that you're looking at: environmental, population differences, economical, medical. All kinds of different contexts should be considered when you're looking at the data. In this example, we see the federal spending over the years across different budget groups, but this fails to consider two important contexts before presenting these findings: inflation and population growth during these years. Two very important contexts that would alter what this very chart is displaying had they been considered. Now, I want to first look at a specific post that I've seen floating around, and then I want to take a look at not just a specific post, but an entire data practice that I've noticed used a lot these days. Unless you've been under a rock for a while, the current climate for race relations is very hot. So, here's the backstory of the post that we're about to see. Starting us off, we have the police brutality, systemic racism, racial injustice, Black Lives Matter argument. This argument is met in opposition with the use of the black on black crime statistics argument. This post we're going to see is in rebuttal to the black on black crime statistics argument. So, what we have here are two parties, both of which, as I mentioned earlier, are apparently data analysts, as they both use data in their arguments and are presenting their findings. With our 3 tips in mind, let's see how our two parties did as data analysts. Starting with this post, we see commented that these findings are sourced from the FBI, so tip 1 is good to go. Although it's not super detailed where this data came from, we can still try and go to the source to investigate for ourselves what's being said here if we like. After my own research, this FBI data refers to the data table that is used in the middle of this post of murder statistics from 2016. Tip number 2. We should question everything that we see from this post, just as we do with every data visualization that we come across. So, we see from the intro pieces of this post that black on black crime is not a thing, that crime has nothing to do with race and everything to do with socioeconomic proximity, and racially homogeneous murder occurs within one zone neighborhood. In the middle of the post, we see a data table and another finding: white on white stats and black on black crime are equivalent. In conclusion, this post states that black on black crime is a false narrative and, again, is not a real thing. My question would be to point me to the FBI data that you referenced that gets me to the findings that you presented here. Revisiting the data table sourced from the FBI murder statistics of 2016, we see that white on white crime accounts for 81.5% of the total murders of white people in 2016, while black on black crime accounts for 89.5% of the total murders of black people in 2016. So, if we were to implement our lie factor with this data, we'd see that visually, in the words that are used, white on white and black on black are equivalent or equal. So, there is no visual difference between these two, giving us a visual effect of 0%. The data, as we see, shows an effect of 8.93%, thus giving us a lie factor of 0, meaning the visual used here, the words, are understating the data. All right, we have a finding. We don't have to look any more into this data. Stop it. Let's not forget tip number 3. Have we dug deep enough into this data? Have we considered the full context of what this data is saying? Have we squeezed every possible finding from this data, all in an unbiased manner? Now, as we saw in a previous example, population is one of many important contexts that should be considered when looking at your data, especially when the data is talking about people. Now, although this post doesn't provide population data, we will have to go and find the data for ourselves. Based on population data from the census, white people make up roughly 76.5% of the total U.S. population, and black people make up roughly 13.4%. Applying this population context to our murder data, we see that the murder rate of the black community is 4.68 times higher than the white community. So, speaking strictly from a data perspective, we see that racially homogeneous murder is not equivalent between black and white communities, and black on black crime is a thing. But wait, You said we're supposed to be unbiased here. You're only presenting one side of this argument. You're right. Let's address the other party of data analysts that brought the black on black crime statistics for us all to see. The black on black crime statistics argument is often presented in response to a separate issue and demands the attention to shift to these black on black crime figures and not the police brutality, systemic racism, racial injustice, and the Black Lives Matter argument that's going around. Well, you've got my attention. Let's take a look at the data practices of this party. The black on black crime statistics argument can be summarized, as seen in many posts on social media, as black on black crime is of more concern than police brutality, systemic racism, racial injustice, and is really a kick in the pants to the Black Lives Matter movement. What's interesting is the figures that are used in this data practice are provided by sources that are similar to the very source our previous example used. And what's really wild about all of this is that the person who posted about black on black crime not being a thing, and to the people who bring up black on black crime in an argument, actually have more in common than their arguments will lead them to believe. And you know what that is? Do you really want to know what that is? All right, since you asked me, what these two parties have in common is neither of them, which a long list of people support, by the way, unbiasedly looked into the full context of the data that they're talking about. Both of them stopped digging at the first couple of findings that they came across, which are unweighted, out of context numbers. A good data analyst keeps digging because there's more findings to be had, even when those findings may be uncomfortable or personally challenging. Why are these numbers so different? What is happening in these communities? Why is nobody looking at the context? Population sizes, education level, unemployment rates, divorce rates, the history of these communities, authoritative bodies, past, present, and future laws. Nobody wants to talk about them. And the most important context out of all of this is these numbers that we're looking at, that table that we just saw, those numbers, they're people. And in that example, murdered people. Now, I get it. One is a rebuttal to the other. I get that. But stating that black on black crime is not a thing when you present data that shows that it is a thing really is a kick to the headstones of every single person you just presented in that data table. And in the same breath, I say to the bringers of the black on black crime statistics argument, without a hint of consideration to the full context of the data, all you're doing is bringing us to look at jail cells and headstones. Numbers without a purpose. What are you saying? What are you trying to show us? To both parties, from a data perspective, both of your arguments need some improvements. And I truly believe, I really do, if both parties were to just keep digging, really keep digging, putting bias aside, discomfort, whatever it is, get that out of the way and kept digging, I really believe both parties would end up in the exact same place. A place of understanding, despite what their arguments say right now. So, in closing, I hope that these have been helpful tips for you as data consumers and data analysts. And remember, check those sources, question everything, and dig with context. Thanks for joining. God bless.